Yes, so now it is 5 minutes past 2. So I think it is time to start. First of all, thank you very much to you all who are joining us today. My name is Karime Mojica, and I am Energy and Environmental Specialist here at DBG, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Just for you to know, and if this is the first time that you're joining us, oh, by the way, I will stop the poll right now so that you don't see it in front of your screen. Yes, so for those of you who are joining us just now, and this is your first Papers Ledge Academy, just a short intro on what this is. PSA, or Papers Ledge Academy, started a couple of, actually a year ago. And this was an initiative that DBG came up with just to share our findings in the industry, because we wanted to bring more attention to basically the industry that we work for and with. And we decided to start these informative sessions totally free of charge, and yeah, see if there was potential, I don't know, knowledge sharing, or if this was valuable to you, the attendees. So this is the third episode that we are hosting this, and we hope that you, that this is useful for you all. So once again, welcome. And the panelists for today are Lara Labotic and Melissa Gomo. Both are experts in this topic, and we will be touching upon the EU ETS and the CBAM and what challenges this will bring, but also what opportunities there are for the pulp and paper industry. So I will give the floor to my colleagues, and I hope that you all enjoy the session.
Thank you, Karime. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We will briefly introduce ourselves. My name is Lara Labotic, and I work as Sustainability Coordinator for DBG Bioenergy. And this is my colleague, Melissa.
Yes, my name is Melissa Gomo, and I work as the Contract Management Intern at DBG. And today we're going to be talking about exploring the latest advancements in the EU Emissions Trading System, the ETS, and we'll be exploring the challenges and opportunities for the paper and pulp industry.
And just as a quick recap, as Karime already mentioned, this is not the first edition of our series. This is actually the third one. And for those of you that missed the first two, in the first episode, we focused on the details of paper-making process and where does the sludge actually originate from in that process, as well as what are the characteristics of paper sludge. In the second episode, we reflected on the climate and energy crisis that European pulp and paper industry faced due to Russian and Ukrainian war. And today we will give you more information about the EU ETS.
So the agenda of today is we're going to start by introducing DBG and giving you an overview of the tailor-made solutions that we can offer the paper industry. Afterwards, we're going to talk about the Green Deal, which is the overall framework that the EU ETS is a part of. Then we'll expand more about the EU ETS, as well as the carbon allowances and how they will be reducing over the coming years for the paper industry. Then we will conclude with a Q&A session after a 5-minute break.
I will start by giving a few words about the introduction of DBG, who we are and where we are. So as you can see on the map, our main office is based in Amsterdam. We have two other offices, one in the north of the country in Appingedam, which is very close to our first large-scale scheduled project in Delfzijl. And we also have an office in Meerbusch in Germany, due to Germany being one of the leading European pulp and paper countries. Then we have our technology center, where we have a pilot process, which is in Limburg. And important to note is that next to Delfzijl plant, we have two other projects scheduled, at least in the Netherlands, one in Amsterdam and the third one in Vlissingen. So what makes us unique and special is the fact that we are using a patented pretreatment technology, which allows us to unlock the anaerobic digestion potential of paper sludge, which is otherwise a feedstock that is normally either incinerated or placed into landfills. And this is a tailor-made solution which is designed to help the pulp and paper industry to meet their latest environmental challenges in the most feasible way possible. A few words about paper sludge, just as a reminder. So it is a feedstock which is produced continuously throughout the year, just like paper is, and it has a very stable composition. And on average, I think it's interesting to say that it has 4 times higher energy content than, for example, manure, which is another very popular feedstock for AD process. We also came up with in this case, we have 2 examples of our tailor-made solutions for the pulp and paper industry. But before that, I will give you a very high-level overview of our process. So for us, it all starts with paper sludge. And important to mention is that paper sludge is very specific because it has extremely high viscosity, which makes it a challenging feedstock to handle mechanically, especially when we're talking about large industrial scales. So for example, pumping, mixing, it all becomes more challenging. And then we have crust formation in the reactors, and we could also have deposits. So there are all kinds of challenges that need to be overcome before doing anaerobic digestion of paper sludge on a large scale, especially. For this reason, we are using the pretreatment with epicellulose technology, which deploys a cocktail of microbes that then produce enzymes in situ. And the main characteristics of the pretreatment is that it lasts only for 2 days. It is operated at 37 degrees Celsius, which means that we use low amounts of energy to conduct this, and it's an aerobic process. So after 2 days, we significantly decrease the viscosity of paper sludge. We are talking about going from more than 20,000 centipoise to below 2,000 centipoise, which are on industrial level. These are acceptable levels of viscosity. And later on, the process becomes, or the process uses off-the-shelf technology. So later on, the sludge goes to anaerobic reactors, where on average we have 25 days retention time. Again, we are talking about mesophilic conditions. And after some time, we obtain biogas, which is a well-known mix of carbon dioxide and methane. And we choose to, at least on a large scale, we choose to separate methane and carbon dioxide, and we liquefy both. So we end up with bio-LNG, which is truck fuel or ship fuel, and liquid biogenic CO2. However, important to mention is that for depending on the need for each client, if we're talking about on-site or near-site solutions, we could stop at the biogas. We could decide to upgrade it to biomethane, but not liquefy biomethane. So we're very flexible and we can adapt to each client. There is another residual stream of our process, which is the digest state, the leftover of the anaerobic reactors. And this we are able to further process and upgrade into a portfolio of green fertilizers. So with this, we are able to completely close the loop, and we have no waste in our process. So when it comes to the 2 potential options that we came up with for on-site / near-site solutions, the first one, which are of course related to the EU ETS, the first one would be a biogas supply to a paper mill with direct co-firing. And here, as you can see, there is a paper mill, which is in itself an installation that is subject to the EU ETS. And paper mills, as we know, they require a lot of energy, a lot of heat, a lot of steam. So they need a high input of certain fuels, for example, natural gas, and they produce sludge during the year. So one of the ideas is that we could set up a smaller scale DBG process on site if there is space or near site, and we could produce biogas, which would then be supplied directly to the mill. And in this case, the paper mill has two main ways of benefiting. One would be to save on extra costs of purchasing those CO2 allowances, or even if already they have an optimized process and maybe they have a surplus of allowances, they could have even more, which means that they could sell it at the current prices or future prices depending on the market. Important to mention is that in this setup, the greenhouse gas savings related to production of liquid biogenic CO2 and fertilizer are not part of this EU ETS. So this is something that the mill cannot claim. The second solution, very similar. There is only one step added, which is a CHP unit. So basically it's exactly the same like before, but then the biogas that is produced is put through the CHP and converted into heat. So the mill can use it directly. And depending on the size, so depending on the installed capacity and the thermal power input, the CHP unit could become part of the EU ETS. And in that case, it could be classified as a sub-installation on the existing paper mill installation, or it would be classified externally. So for example, through us. And now I will give the floor to Melissa to further introduce you to Green Deal and EU ETS.
Yes, so the Green Deal was launched in 2019, and it is a set of policies that the EU put in place to achieve two specific goals, particularly to reach climate neutrality by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels. And the EU really wants to take a holistic and comprehensive approach to achieving these goals. And the EU ETS is a very key part of this whole scheme. And so the EU ETS itself takes a cap and trade approach, which means that the EU sets a cap on the total emissions that are allowed, as well as the allowances, and businesses are expected to purchase these allowances so as to cover their total emissions in the year. And the purpose of this is to help member states achieve climate neutrality by 2050, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 62% compared to 2005 levels. And it's actually very important to highlight that the target was increased from 43% to 62%, thus showing that the EU is very much committed to achieving decarbonization. And another goal is to promote investment into low carbon technologies, as well as to contribute to climate change initiatives. So now we'll just go through the legislative changes to the framework of the EU ETS. The ETS directive was adopted in 2003, and the system itself was launched in 2005. And phase one, which was between 2005 and 2007, the EU really wanted to ease the member states into this new system, and so all the emissions were set at national level, and all the allowances were given to businesses for free, and the penalty for non-compliance was set at 40 euros per ton. In phase two, which was between 2008 and 2012, we saw that the proportion of free allowances fell slightly to about 90%, and the penalty for non-compliance was increased to 100 euro per ton of CO2 emitted. In phase three, which was between 2013 and 2020, we saw for the very first time an EU-wide cap on the emissions, and auctioning became the default for allocating the allowances. And in phase four, which is now between 2021 and 2030, we're starting to see a gradual reduction of free allowances and the phasing in of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, but both Lara and I will talk about CBAM at a later stage. Lara is now going to talk a little bit more about the carbon allowances.
Yeah, so as we already mentioned, the entire system works on the cap and trade principle. And just to clarify, one carbon credit or one allowance is equivalent to 1 ton of CO2 equivalent emitted. So that's what it allows companies to emit. And these allowances can be bought or sold on the market. And the graph here represents a snapshot at current prices. And you can see that for the first time, the European carbon reached 100 euros a ton. So we can see the evolution of the price here. And how it all works, especially related to auctioning versus free allocation. So as we already mentioned, auctioning is the rule. And free allocation is the exception, and it's a transitional regime, so it will be eventually phased out. It's important to note that free allocation only applies to those industries or sectors which are deemed exposed to significant risk of carbon leakage, and we will further explain what carbon leakage means later. But for now, it's important to note that pulp and paper industry is one of these sectors. And the amount of free allocation that each mill or installation can receive depends on the product benchmark values, which is another name for reference values for the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's expressed in tons of CO2 per ton of product. And this helps us to, let's say, determine the level of free allocation for each product. So as you can see, this is the actual allocation formula. The FI represents the annual preliminary allocation for sub-installation or just installation in a year. And BMI is actually the applicable benchmark value. We will talk about it a bit more in detail soon. There's also a historic activity level and applicable carbon leakage exposure factor, which can be between 0 and 1. So it's always in that range. And when it comes to benchmark values, the table is very interesting because in the first column, we can see products which are typical for pulp and paper industry. So the most commonly produced product categories. And we can see that they all have certain benchmark values. And we can see that these values, they changed from phase 3, which was between 2013 to 2020, until the first half of phase 4, which is now. So we can see that on average in the last column, these reductions were about 24%, which implies that gradually the industry is being pushed into optimizing their processes more and more. And it means that eventually the level of free allocation is going to be even less for this kind of industry. And important to note is that these values are actually based on the average number for top 10% best performing installations already. So they already act a little bit as a filter. And now pulp and paper industry as a sector, these are the emissions, and we can see in the green line represents the pulp sector, and then the yellow line is production of paper and cardboard. So we see that in both cases, they actually managed to decrease their emissions slightly, but there is certainly more room for progress, especially when it comes to paper and cardboard production. And we can see there are two graphs on this side. And if we first focus on the one on the bottom left side, we see the representation of free allowances represented in red columns versus the actual emissions of the sector. And we can see that especially in the previous years, but even now, the pulp and paper industry is actually in a situation of so-called structural oversupply of allowances. But we can see that over the years, the red line is slowly evening out with the actual emissions. So as we already mentioned, and as it's seen on the graph on the right, actually the level of free allocation is expected to be completely phased out by 2034, and this happens interchangeably as CBAM is phased in, and we will explain a bit more about it now.
So CBAM is a tool that was designed to prevent carbon leakage, and carbon leakage is when a company, because of the way that the EU is more and more ambitious when it comes to its climate legislation, leaves the EU to a non-EU state so as to produce there and benefit from the less strict rules when it comes to climate change initiatives, with the intention to later on import back the goods into the EU. And so CBAM is a tool to put a fair price on the carbon emitted during the production of these goods when they are now entering the EU. And it does this by ensuring that the carbon price of the imports are equivalent to domestic production. And so it will now be as if the goods had been produced in the EU under a carbon pricing scheme. And the two goals that the EU wants to achieve is to promote cleaner production in non-EU countries, as well as to ensure that its objectives are not undermined. And so CBAM is going to be applying to certain industries that are part of the carbon leakage list, particularly cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electricity, and hydrogen. But because the paper industry is also part of the carbon leakage list, we may find that at a later point, CBAM will start to apply to it as well. So this concludes our webinar. We hope that you've learned that Europe is becoming more and more ambitious when it comes to becoming climate neutral by 2050, and that the EU ETS is a very key part of this, since a lot of industries are going to be subjected to it, including the paper and pulp industry. And although there may be some techno-economical challenges to this, DBG really believes that there are a lot of opportunities, and it is very much committed to working with the paper and pulp industry to comply with the EU ETS and improve their market position by reducing waste disposal costs, producing local energy, and creating more resilient businesses. So now we will have a 5-minute break, and during this break, please put your questions in the chat box, and Lara and I are going to have a Q&A session afterwards.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your patience and your questions. We received those, and so we will start answering them now. And in case we don't have time to address all the questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email and we will get back to you, of course.
So the first question we have is, what kind of information does DBG require from a paper mill before making a proposal for an on-site or near-site solution?
Right. So for us, it all starts from sludge. So this is the basics, and basically we need to know the annual volumes of the sludge produced, and we need to know the quality of streams. So that being said, it always helps if a paper mill has already done some lab analysis on the composition of their streams, but we still prefer to do it ourselves because we have some experience in assessing the potential of each feedstock. And by this, we can already give some guesstimate numbers for, let's say, how much biogas we would be able to produce. And then, of course, there are practical questions like, for example, if there is space on site to put some of our equipment, or if on site there's already some equipment that we could use to integrate with our process, for example, maybe an existing AD tank. But we also want to know what are the current emissions of the factory and what are the ambitions, like the long-term plan, and also how much energy is being currently consumed. And this is all needed to make sure that we create the best solution for each client. Then we have another question. So what was, okay, so when was the new EU ETS target created? So I guess the question refers to when was it increased from 43% emission reductions to 62, because that's quite an increase.
Yes, so this was actually changed last year, at the end of last year, so December 2022, that's when the deal between the European Parliament, the Commission, and the Council was struck to increase the target from 43% to 62%. So the next question is, as a paper mill, what are the benefits of working with DBG under the EU ETS?
Right. So as we already mentioned, I mean, it depends on each client. It depends on a case-to-case basis, but 3 or 4 general benefits that we saw is that a paper mill could save on purchase of extra allowances, or again, if they're in a good position, they could create an extra surplus, and they could actually bank them when the market prices are the most favorable. But also we would reduce the waste disposal costs, which mills have significant problems with nowadays. And in general, we would help them to create more independent and resilient businesses. Then we have another question. So basically, what are the sources for the graphs used in the presentation? I guess the question refers to the graphs related to the overall emissions of the industry, or the amount of allowances versus the amount of emissions. And these are all taken from the European Union statistic database. I don't know the link by heart actually, but it's an official source, and we can share it.
Yes.
Yeah. So please, if you still want to know the specific source, just send us an email and we will address it. And then we have what type of fuel is used during the production of or processing phase, I guess referring to the paper making process, because we put it as a general fossil fuel. Actually, so most of the mills, they use natural gas, and then they either convert it to steam, but most of the time it's natural gas. Yeah. There's one last question that we have, and it's related to, can you elaborate a bit more how the free allocation for product benchmarks works? So again, let's say if we simplify it and we take into account a tissue producer, And let's say the current benchmark value for tissue producers is 0.254 tons of CO2 per ton of product. So this is already a filter because most of the times they're gonna have higher emissions than that. But let's say a factory A actually has exceptionally efficient processes, or they invested a lot in their sustainability practices already, and maybe their carbon footprint for that product is lower than that reference value. It basically means that they can still get 100% of reallocation for free, versus if we have factory B that, let's say, produces that has twice as much carbon footprint, then the factory B would only be eligible for a certain percent of reallocation. The rest they would have to purchase. So again, these benchmark values are there to reward a well-performing mills, and to incentivize slowly to push the industry to do better instead of just having a sharp decrease. With this, we conclude our Q&A session, and we would like to thank you for joining our webinar, and we will give the floor to our moderator, Karime, as she has a final few words to say and introduce the final poll for you. Thank you very much.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I hope that you have enjoyed this third episode of the Paper Sledge Academy. And we intend to do these sessions a bit more or a lot more often. So I'm gonna share with you some poll questions, and there you will, just share with us if there's any other specific topic that you'd be interested in, so that we can research on it and then do another or host another webinar. So you should see, yes, the wrap-up poll now. And we would like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. And if you arrived a little bit later or you missed part of this, do not worry, because all our webinars are present in our YouTube channel. And also, if you go to our website or to our LinkedIn, you can also find them there. So if maybe you have also other questions that pop after this session, or we were not able to answer them, please just make sure that you reach out to us. You should have received an email as well with a contact us form. So there, if you have any questions and you don't have our personal email or our work emails, you can, of course, fill in that formulary, and we'll make sure that all your questions have been answered. And maybe you don't have a question, but maybe this webinar sparked your interest on a potential collaboration that we are, of course, very much interested in as well. So yes, feel free to reach out if there's something that you think could be of interest. And I think with this, I would like to wrap up this webinar. So once again, thank you for joining, and we wish you from DBG a very, very nice day. Thank you and goodbye.